And for more on that and other Big Ten topics, we welcome in Joel Klatt, the lead analyst for Fox's game coverage. Joel, let's start there with Penn State. And as far as we know, the two most decimated position groups in the Big Ten right now are Penn State's running backs room and Wisconsin's quarterbacks room. We'll get to the Badgers, the big news of the day, in a moment. But how prepared is Penn State to move forward now here without Journey Brown and without Noah Cain?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. Now, they're very fortunate, Rev, that this is one of those positions that they've created a lot of depth, right? They weren't relying on one guy, and so they've created a lot of depth in that room, and I think that's the only way that they're going to be able to survive. The defense is going to have to continue to play well, and they did play well against Indiana. Indiana did not get much going, in particular on the ground, and that's a defense even without Micah Parsons after the opt-out. But this is the unfortunate reality of college football, and by the way, non-COVID related. These are just normal course of injuries, you know. Then you have a transfer, which is kind of the modern style of college football. So the reason Penn State would be able to or can weather this is the fact that they've recruited so well, in particular at that position where they've got some depth.
Let's turn the page to Wisconsin. You mentioned Penn State isn't COVID related. Obviously, Wisconsin's is, and this is the big story of the day in the Big Ten. So we know the game against Nebraska is canceled. How concerned are you about the Badgers going forward now?
Yeah, I'm really concerned, and I think this is to a greater point. You know, this is come to fruition the tightrope that the Big Ten is trying to walk with no off weeks. Like, we've seen outbreaks in other conferences, and I sat here last week and I told you we need to expect, you know, outbreaks in the Big Ten as well, and cancellations in the Big Ten. And here we go in week 2. We've had them at Baylor, we've had them at Florida. You know, they've popped up at other places, and it's certainly unfortunate. The first and foremost thing is, like, I just hope everybody is okay up there. I know Paul Christ has tested positive, so let's hope everybody is going to be fine and get through this like everybody else in college football has been able to get through it. Now, but the dominoes as far as the game and the roster, that's what I'm most worried about. When I look at some of the other outbreaks around college football, what you see is you get that one positive and everyone's like, oh man, there was a couple positive tests, but then the subsequent days is when you get 3, 4, 5 more guys, and now all of a sudden you're up to the 12. So the first thing you've got to do is stop the outbreak, right? And they're going to pause team activities, but then you've got to look at when can we get people back, both from isolation and from quarantine, who tested positive and that are in the vicinity and have to quarantine themselves. Rev, that's what I get concerned about, because how many games is this going to bleed into? Is it Purdue? Can they play that one? Are they going to have a roster for Purdue? Is it Michigan? Are they going to be able to play Michigan? And then you start looking at the unintended consequences of all the schedules that they'll affect going forward. So this is a big deal, and let's hope for the best, and that they can contain the outbreak and get their roster to a point where they can play games here in the next 10 or 15 days.
Again, had they played the Huskers this week, Nebraska would have started that game without a couple of starters in the secondary. Cam Taylor-Britt, Deontay Williams, both out for the first half due to targeting, so now they would have to sit out the first half of that game against Northwestern next week. But I saw that you were talking about targeting this week and maybe a potential solution in your mind for dealing with that. Give us a sense of what you're looking at.
Well, first of all, I think that the implementation of the rule is flawed, right? And I understand why the rule exists, and I'm not against having the rule in general. I just think that we need to work on how we are implementing this rule of targeting. I believe wholeheartedly that we should have 2 categories of targeting, where we are taking the instances in which there is clear intent to use the crown of the helmet as a weapon, and we are ejecting those players, and then in all other instances, and instances, Rev, that I would call kind of like acts common to the game or movements common to the game, right? And almost unavoidable hits to the head or neck area. I'm fine even continuing to penalize those, but I am so tired of seeing these kids disqualified for these hits. And I know, listen, a lot of people were all over me about the Deontay Williams hit, but here's the bottom line is he went in below the head or neck area with his shoulder, period. Okay, and that was the wrong call. He should not have been thrown out. And we're talking about a season in which we don't have 12 games, we have 8, right? And now they're going to lose a game, which means they have 7. So the the penal nature to the ejection and then carrying it forward is just too much. Like, I'm tired of watching these kids lose opportunities for doing things that the coaches are telling them to do.
Joel, what would you think about splitting the difference and doing almost like a penalty box and saying you sit for 10 minutes or whatever it might be?
Yeah, or maybe the rest of the series, and I could even see that, so that the penalty is more than just 15 yards. You don't get to just stay in the game and have that emotional aspect of being in the game while dealing with the fact that you just got a penalty that you don't think that you should have gotten. So I don't mind that at all.
Let's focus in on your game this week. I mentioned you have Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan looked fabulous in its opener, I think exceeding most people's expectations. Michigan State, quite the opposite, really struggled in Mel Tucker's debut. What would the Spartans have to do to keep it close in this game?
Well, that's a great question. Now, Revan, in this industry, like, you walk off the set after every show. I walk out of the booth after every game. And I think that this is true for all of us, that the show was never as bad as we think it was, nor was it as good as we thought it was, right? And I think that reigns true for football as well, in particular after 1 week. I don't think Michigan State is as bad as people think they are, and Michigan may not be as good as people think they are, because yes, they looked fabulous. Maybe Minnesota was missing too much, and we just incorrectly made the assumption, certainly I did, that Minnesota was going to be a top-end team in the West. So when you look at Michigan State, they turned the ball over 7 times and had 2 fourth-down failures. That's basically 9 turnovers. 9 turnovers. I feel like it's Ferris Bueller's day off. 9 times they threw the ball, got the ball, Rutgers did, without receiving it from a kick. So that's a problem. Their defense for the Spartans didn't play all that poorly. I think Michigan State's a little better than we're giving them credit for, and I don't think it's going to be a surprise to me at all if this is a close game, in particular in the first half. Having said that, I will say this about Michigan. I'm bullish on Michigan, and here's why. They've got a quarterback. This kid's got a quick release and a strong arm, and he's perfect for this system. I think Joe Milton is a really good player. And then, Rev, the other part is that they've melded the best parts of Jim Harbaugh's offense and the best parts of Josh Gaddis's offense and together, and now they're starting to form an identity. They did that by mirroring the power running game, bringing Ben Mason back to the fullback position. They're running power, the gap schemes, pulling guards, leading with the fullback. That's really good stuff, and one of the reasons why they ran the football so effectively. And then they're pairing that with the RPO spread system of how to get the ball on the outside to fast players. I think Michigan's offense is going to be really, really good this year, and they're just scratching the surface here early in the season.
Got some explosion in that offense in week 1, which was desperately needed. I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing the call, yourself and Gus Johnson and Jenny Taft as well. Thanks so much for joining us, Joel. We'll talk to you next week.
You got it. Have a good day, guys.